benzodiazepines that Dr. Murray admitted to giving, and I want you to assume that Dr. Murray gave just the 25 milligrams of propofol, okay? In that setting, with the benzodiazepines and the 25 milligrams, assume there was no drip, do all your opinions that you've shared with the jury here today still apply?
Yes. Still, it's inappropriate to give propofol for sleep. You don't give it in an unmonitored setting without the appropriate equipment or backup. You still need to be prepared for an emergency. His response to the arrest was still inappropriate, and his delay for 911 was still inappropriate, and his documentation was still inappropriate.
And it would be a foreseeable risk that the patient in that setting, with the drugs administered by Dr. Murray as he states he gave, it would be a foreseeable risk that the patient could suffer respiratory depression and cardiovascular failure.
Yes, sir.
And when you take all the extreme deviations in total that you've delineated, assuming it's the 25 milligrams, it's still your opinion that Dr. Murray played a direct causal role in the death of Michael Jackson?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Mr. Logan, thank you. Recross-examination, Mr. Flanagan.
Doctor, on that sleep study that
Yes, sir.
we've commented on, the net effect was that propofol helped insomnia, didn't it?
Yes.
Oftentimes, doctors on occasion will use certain drugs for off-label purposes, won't they?
Yes, sir.
And sometimes the use of those drugs on off-label purposes become the norm in later years.
Yes, sir.
Now, in your analysis of this case for the medical board, you've made certain determinations of various acts of Dr. Murray were beyond the standard of care. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, your analysis for the medical board is a lot different than the analysis in this case, isn't it?
Sustained.
In this case, you need to make an analysis as to whether or not each one of these deviations was a causative factor in the death of Michael Jackson, don't you?
Relevance.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, the question one more time.
In this case, you need to make an analysis as to whether or not these deviations were a causative factor in the death of Michael Jackson. Is that correct?
Correct. And I even in my statement, standard of care, I stated that it did directly impact his death.
Okay. Well, you've come up with a lot of deviations that you can feel that are egregious, that you've talked about in this case, that really had nothing to do with Michael Jackson's death. Isn't that correct?
Objection
No.
states the testimony.
Well, it didn't.
Just a moment, please. Overruled. The answer can remain.
I mean, not having a battery backup for monitoring equipment wasn't a causative factor, was it?
Again, when in this statement, I go through the standard of care. So even though the standard of care was breached, it may not directly affect his death, but I comment on all the standard of care. But if you look generally on 5 of the 6 points I made, whether propofol should be given in the first place, was it given on a monitored setting, was he ready for an emergency, how he behaved during the arrest, and his delay in calling 911, those 5 things all directly linked to Mr. Jackson's death.
Dr. Murray gave propofol without problem for 40 days, didn't he?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence.
The objection is sustained. That's the form of the question.
You read his statement where he told the police that he'd been given propofol to Michael Jackson for approximately 40 days. 50 days? 40 or 50 days, correct?
Correct.
Without incident.
Correct.
Now, your analysis regarding the causation in this case, you've made certain assumptions, haven't you?
I don't understand your question.
Well, in concluding that a violation caused the death of Michael Jackson, you've made certain assumptions in this case, haven't you?
He got propofol, so you don't give propofol, so that's not an assumption. And then he was not monitored, so I didn't assume that. He wasn't prepared for an emergency. I didn't assume that. The way he described behavior on his very own words to the arrest, I didn't make that up. And his delay of calling 911 was not an assumption, it's fact. So I didn't assume anything. I have facts.
Well, you assume, for purposes of determining whether or not Dr. Murray was responsible for his death, that Dr. Murray gave the medications that were in Michael Jackson's body to him. Didn't you?
According to, it could be all from his body, yes. From Dr. Murray, yes.
You assumed that Dr. Murray gave him those medications, didn't you?
I can assume that it gave his medications, yes.
And you assume that he gave those medications in a lethal amount, don't you?
It can be assumed that he gave the lethal amount.
And as a matter of fact, you even...
Those are assumptions, you're right.
You've assumed that Dr. Murray gave him a drip along with the slow bolus injection, didn't you?
I believe he gave a drip, but just as I answered Mr. Walgren's question, when you give even 25 milligrams of propofol, and assuming he was on a drip, he would still be directly linked because the patient needs to be monitored even after 25 milligrams of propofol.
And you have no idea what 25 milligrams of propofol would do you?
I do very little, probably.
Nothing further.
Mr. Flanagan, thank you. We redirect by the people? People's counsel are conferring.
Just one question. Dr. Steinberg, just to be abundantly clear,
Sorry.
all the facts that were relayed to you in Dr. Murray's own words, and for the sake of argument, let's assume that all transpired and Michael Jackson then self-administered either lorazepam or propofol because he was not being monitored appropriately by his doctor who was entrusted with his care. Wouldn't Dr. Murray still be a direct causal link in Michael Jackson's death?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Walgren, thank you. We recross, Mr. Flanagan? Thank you. May Dr. Steinberg be excused, Mr. Walgren.
Please, Your Honor.
Mr. Flanagan?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Dr. Steinberg, give me a moment. I want to thank you for your testimony. Please don't discuss your testimony or the facts of the case with any other witnesses until we finish the trial. You may step down and leave your excuse, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. At this time, the people may call their next witness.